And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The 2 American journalists who were detained in North Korea have described for the first time details about their arrest and detention. In an article published today in the Los Angeles Times, Laura Ling and Yuna Lee admitted they briefly crossed into North Korea on March 17th, but said they were on Chinese soil when they were detained. At the time, they were working on a story about human trafficking for Current TV. Ling and Lee described their arrests by writing, quote, "We tried with all our might to cling to bushes, ground, anything that would keep us on Chinese soil, but we were no match for the determined soldiers. They violently dragged us back across the ice to North Korea and marched us to a nearby army base where we were detained." The 2 were held for 140 days and eventually put on trial and sentenced to 12 years of hard labor. They were freed last month after a visit to North Korea by former President Bill Clinton. While the case of Laura Ling and Yuna Lee made international headlines, as did the recent jailing of the American journalist Roxana Saberi in Iran, far less attention has been paid to another imprisoned journalist, Ibrahim Jassam, an Iraqi photographer who works for the Reuters news agency. 1 year ago today, U.S. and Iraqi forces raided Jassam's home outside Baghdad. Soldiers seized his computer hard drive and cameras. He was led away, handcuffed and blindfolded. For the past year, the U.S. military has held Jassam without charge. 10 months ago, the Iraqi Central Criminal Court ordered his release for lack of evidence, but the U.S. military refused to release him, claiming he was a high security threat. Reuters, the Committee to Protect Journalists, and Reporters Without Borders have all called for his release. To talk more about the story, we're joined by Mohammed Abdel Dayem of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Dayem is CPJ's program coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa. We did call the Pentagon to invite them on the program or provide a statement, but they didn't respond to our request. Mohammed, welcome to Democracy Now! Talk about his case. What happened exactly 1 year ago?
They came into his house early in the morning, dragged him out in front of his family. He lived in the outskirts of Baghdad, just south of Baghdad. Dragged him out. His family has never seen him again. Like you said, he appeared in an Iraqi court, and the Iraqi court found no evidence against him and ordered him released. The U.S. military claims that they've since the Iraqi court session have uncovered more evidence against him and continue to hold him until today.
Tell us a little about Ibrahim. How did he come to work for Reuters?
He has been working for Reuters since late 2006. Up till that point, he had absolutely no altercations in terms of security, either with the Americans or with the Iraqis. A good journalist by all accounts, from everything we've heard. This was his only altercation. Unfortunately, it's cost him at least a year of his life so far.
As I said, we did invite the Pentagon on the program, but they declined our request. But I do want to read you a statement from the U.S. Marine Corps spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Johnson. She said this about Ibrahim Jassam, quote, "He is currently classified as a high-security threat based on the intelligence information collected against him at this point of capture and since he's been in detention. Though we appreciate the decision of the Central Criminal Court of Iraq in the Ibrahim Jassam case, their decision does not negate the intelligence information that currently lists him as a threat to Iraq's security and stability." Your response, Mohammed?
Well, we haven't seen this evidence, so I can't really comment on it. We've since then met with the Pentagon. They've told us that this information is classified and that they can't share it with us or anybody else for that matter. And you know, we've argued that this man deserves due process, and he has not gotten such due process. But the U.S. military insists that the information is classified and will not share it with anybody. And so we're sort of at an impasse at this point.
The Reuters editor-in-chief, David Schlesinger, has said this about the case, quote, "Reuters is concerned at the continued and protracted incarceration of Ibrahim Jassam and continues to urge the U.S. military to either charge or release him. Reuters believes any accusation against a journalist should be aired publicly and dealt with fairly and swiftly, with the journalist having the right to counsel and present a defense." So he hasn't been charged by the U.S. military, has been held for exactly a year as of today, but the Iraqi courts said he should be freed. What was that process? What information did they have? What evidence did they consider?
Well, the U.S. military, at that point, this was November 2008, shared the information it had with the criminal court, the Central Criminal Court of Iraq. all its information as far as we know. At that point, the court didn't find enough evidence to hold Jassam and ordered him released. The U.S. military claims that since then they've uncovered more information against Jassam, and that now they're holding him based primarily on that new information that has appeared or that they've uncovered since November 2008.
So the Iraqi government is not in charge here, though he's being held in Iraq. Whose custody exactly is he being held?
He is being held by the American military.
Mm-hmm. But the Iraqis have no jurisdiction.
No.
Why do you think this case is getting so little attention? I mean, compare it to the journalists who've just returned from North Korea who were detained for less time.
I'm not exactly sure. I mean, security in Iraq has improved a lot, and there are a lot fewer incidents with journalists in Iraq, and that may be one of the reasons it's getting less attention. Iraq has gotten less attention in the news in general terms, and so that might be one of the reasons.
Reuters has been hit hard, among others. Mazandana, one of the top Reuters cameramen, was killed outside Abu Ghraib. This was a few years ago, an award-winning cameraman. I think the words of the U.S. military was, "We engaged a cameraman. He was holding his camera." Then there was Taras Pratsiuk, who was a cameraman for Reuters, April 8th, 2003, a few weeks into the invasion, killed when the U.S. military opened fire at the Palestine Hotel. Also, Jose Coso was killed at that time as well, the cameraman who worked for Telecinco in Spain. U.S. has held other Iraqi journalists without charge, sometimes for years, and then released them. What is the record of these releases?
Well, none of the journalists that were held by the U.S. military since 2003 have been charged. Not a single one has been charged. They've all been released.
And how long were they held for?
Some for months, others for multiple years. Again, without charge. Jassam is the last remaining one, and so we hope that he's released soon and that we can, turn that page.
Is it to stop him from working? Is it giving a different picture when Western forces, when Western reporters pull out, when it's a very dangerous situation? Those who are left on the ground are often from that country and are certainly depicting the war from the target end, let's just say, rather than, embedded in the military.
Well, I'm not sure that is the case. It may or may not be. There are plenty of Iraqi cameramen and Iraqi reporters who are working for Reuters and other outlets, and I think they're more or less reporting from that same perspective, the Iraqi perspective. But regardless of that, Jassam deserves some kind of due process. The man has been languishing in jail for an entire year, and it seems like an open-ended process. It is not clear when this man will be released. According to the Pentagon, he has been assessed a security rating, and he will be released when they get to that point. They're releasing the least dangerous people first, and they're going down the list. And according to them, they'll eventually get to him. Well, eventually is not good enough, unfortunately.
His family speaking out?
They have given a number of interviews in the past couple of months.
I wanted to turn now to Iran, the situation there, where the government continues to hold over a dozen journalists following the disputed presidential election in June. The Canadian-Iranian Newsweek journalist Mazir Bahari has been imprisoned since June 21st. Another journalist, Ahmed Zaid Abadi, recently went on a 17-day hunger strike to protest his imprisonment. Talk about these reporters.
Unfortunately, the Iranian authorities are holding around 3 dozen journalists at this point. And have released at least that many since June 12th. Among them are the 2 journalists you've mentioned. Bahari appeared in court and looked very, very much exhausted, and looks like he had lost a lot of weight since he had been arrested. Zaid Abadi, who you've also mentioned, was finally able to meet with his wife, who's also a journalist and was also detained in early June and has been released since then. It took her 53 days to be able to meet with him, and he described the conditions of his detention, and they're frankly horrific. He's being held in a 1 meter by 1.5 meter cell that's about 3 by 4.5 feet, entirely alone for weeks on end. He went on a 17-day hunger strike and was essentially delirious and close to death at that point. He was released from his cell, fed, and put back into the same cell. These journalists are, at the very least, suffering from extreme mental exhaustion, if not more.
Well, also the Americans